My name is Dwayne Schultes from Vital Transformation. We're going to be, just going forward through the agenda now, we're going to be discussing real-world data and drug development and how, Get Real has impacted this, as well as discussing findings and things moving forward. This is the end of the project, but certainly not the end of the deliverable. As you can see from the things upstairs, there have been lots of things that have been approached in the work packages, and it's been very exciting. A couple items of administration. Given the strike action going on outside, there's been a request to cut these sessions slightly shorter this afternoon. I think we all understand why. So we're going to be running this session until 5 minutes to 3, then we'll be having our break, and then we'll have a short final session after that, which will also be cut shorter. We'll be ending the conference at 4 o'clock. You can also see we've had some shuffling of bodies, and there's some new people on stage. I will now introduce the panel. We've been joined by Elaine Irving, who's the head of outcomes at GSK. Hello, Elaine. To her right, your left, is Rick Roba, who you all know from Utrecht. Antonio Ciaglia from the International Alliance of Patient Organizations. Hello, Anthony. And last but not least, Rob Hemmings from the MHRA and the statistical advisor to the CHMP committee. Hello, Rob. How are you? So what we're going to do now is we're going to give everybody a couple minutes to describe what they've been working on with Get Real, and then we're going to have a few questions. But also the main thing here, you've all played with the toys upstairs. We're definitely going to want your input and your questions as well. So if I can begin, Rick, from your standpoint, how do you think Get Real is going to fit into what's going on going forward? And how do you see real-world evidence broadly playing into healthcare in Europe? How do you see this working going forward?
You want a short version of that?
Yeah, sure. In 20 minutes or less, please. Thank you.
Well, in fact, there's a single answer, I believe, to the two questions, in the sense that I think if there's one thing that Get Real has been doing and has achieved, it has brought together so many people on the same topic, and not only the ones that were part of the discussions or the meetings, but also their backgrounds, the companies, the parties that they stood for. So it was, quoting Lucien from his talk, I think that Get Real has been a driver in our environment of the realization that real-world evidence is something that can be defined and something that is needed. So I'm sure we'll see more of this. And one reason is that the system, as we've seen it so far, fails to deliver what society requires, and it's also not sustainable. So alongside the quest for real-world evidence, I believe that the modes in which we try to generate that real-world evidence are also going to enable us to continue our research in a credible way. The sort of studies that are currently required to get sort of large purpose drugs entering markets, outcome trials of thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and then still not delivering the sort of data that subsequent parties require, it's not something we can maintain. So the future is really, I believe, very different from what we see now.
And do you feel this is being driven by the science, obviously? I mean, if you look at something like the checkpoint drugs, the oncology drugs that have such wide response rates, high adverse events, 20% response rates that are nearly curative, 160 months of current remission rates in melanoma. I mean, do you see this being driven by the reality of what we're seeing in actual treatment?
I think it's being driven by the reality of what we're seeing in actual treatment. Yes. Because that, at the end of the day, that's what counts for people.
Now, Elaine, this is the first time you've been on stage today?
No.
No, sorry. All right, it's the second time you've been on stage today. Can you just tell us about what your role's been in Get Real and how you see what you've done applying to your work at GSK?
Yeah, sure. So as of last year, I took over from Chris as the coordinator of the Get Real project. But I also head up a real-world evidence study delivery team at GSK. So we're kind of at the heart of what is now the kind of real-world evidence generation engine within the company. So I think for me, what I've seen is, for a company, we've discussed a lot today about how we change the paradigm of drug development, but for a company to actually do that is a huge feat. We've got a huge framework and mechanics in place that's been there for years, and we've done things for years the way we've always done them. I think there's definitely no debate that we need to change, but driving that change is not easy. And I think what Get Real has really helped to do is to bring all the different perspectives together from all the different stakeholders, to really create a single goal around trying to tackle all the different challenges that each of the different stakeholders have in this space. But it really takes every single one of those pieces to move together to help us succeed and really change that drug development paradigm. So for me, the tools that we've generated and you've seen today are invaluable, really, because we can then internally use those within the asset teams when we're having discussions about how important it is to generate the evidence and focus on the access to patients piece. We can use tools that they can see have already been supported and contributed to by all the different stakeholders that we have involved in Get Real, which just makes the discussion so much easier. And as well, we're at the stage where it is a new area, and there are pockets of people who have become experts in this space or are experts in this space. But there are a lot of individuals that aren't. And so again, a lot of the tools that have been generated really will help us on a day-to-day basis bring the entire organisation up to that same level of education.
And how has it been moving this through GSK? Is there a receptiveness to trying to approach a project like Get Real, or is there willingness to accept doing things new?
Yeah, I think everybody is always supportive, and I think certainly a project like Get Real, which was a kind of first of its kind within the IMI framework, I think as Rob alluded to before, none of us get extra time to spend on these projects. We have to sort of absorb them as the day job. But I think when you have something like Get Real, where the companies can really see the value, because we are going on a daily basis and having the discussions and presenting evidence packages and facing challenges around getting our drugs to patients. The organisations can see the value of this type of public-private partnership, where there is no other way of really achieving that consensus and level of understanding across all the key stakeholders that are required.
And if we talk about public-private partnership and key stakeholders, Antonio, that would be you. You represent the key stakeholders. How has your role played out in Get Real as the patient rep, and how have you been passing this information or collaborating through with your stakeholder groups? How's this actually been working in practice?
Within Get Real, I was representing International Alliance of Patients Organization, which is a global alliance. So we had the possibility to give patient representatives throughout the world a say on such an important matter. So this is the reason why we decided also to undertake primary research activities, which mostly consisted of a survey and focus groups, so quantitative and qualitative methodologies as well, to make sure that all the wide range and array of data and perspectives can be successfully and fruitfully captured. So we strongly believed in adopting methodological pluralism in getting patients' perspectives, given the strong degree of diversity of our membership. These research activities resulted in a number of research outputs, in some IAPO-led research outputs. And I have to say that Get Real, from the patient perspective, from the IAPO perspective, aside from being a project that touches on such an important matter, also gave us the possibility to start eliciting patients' perspectives and views on topics on which patients do not often have a say. So it was also a way of engaging with patient communities in a different ways. And I think this was one of the possibly distinctive added values of this research project to the patient community.
When we look at outcomes measures as a basis for determining effectiveness of therapies, this is becoming quite a controversial hot-button issue in Brussels, and it's not just Get Real, it's several other projects that are running as well. How has the feedback from your membership been in general regarding using real-world evidence to get therapies approved? What's their feeling on it overall?
Of course, it's not possible to convey a view that is representative of all the perspectives, but in general, I can say that patients were, first of all, very strongly interested in and keen on receiving more information as to what Get Real is, what real-world evidence is, and how it can be best used. And second, I have to say that there was a strong inclination towards using real-world evidence in the drug development process. They felt very comfortable with real-world evidence processes, especially with regard some choices in developing pragmatic trials. They felt that, you know, this specific way of approaching clinical research sometimes is better reflective of the principle that we call patient-centeredness. So they displayed interest and also willingness to further engage with these methodologies.
Thank you. And last but not least, certainly, the other side of the issue, Rob, the statistician, the hard, cold bolt of reality on real-world evidence, the hard edge statistical verification of everything that's been going on. How do you see your role as someone who is a decision maker with regards to an arbiter? You're an umpire on this, really. You decide what's fair and what's foul. You decide what's good, what's bad. How do you see Get Real working in the context of your work with the CHMP and MHRA? How do you see it being applicable?
So thanks, and hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you don't mind me being a little bit pragmatic in my dress code. As per the introduction, I work at the UK Licensing Authority, but I spend most of my time at the EMA, so I sit on the CHMP that makes the benefit risk decisions for new medicines and variations to licenses. And I chair the Scientific Advice Working Party, where companies to come and talk prospectively about their drug development. And for this project, I've been a member of the Scientific Advisory Board, the SAB. You can look on the organogram. and Chris and Rick can say whether my contributions have been what would be expected from a SAB member, but I think they've been high level and remote, and maybe that's a good thing, I don't know. I came to the meeting in Bern after the end of year one, and I was a little bit nervous. There was a lot of brainstorming going on, and the sort of final outputs were a long way from being clear. And I'm very pleased listening today about how much structure there is now in the final outputs. You look on the website, through the publications, the research outputs, all the various deliverables. It's an impressive array of work. And I hope that the navigator, I didn't get a chance to look at it upstairs, but I hope that the navigator makes all of that work really visible and accessible to people, including the challenges here. And I will, you've heard me talk about this before, and I will continue to talk about it a little bit today. We should realize that real-world evidence, I don't like the term personally, but hey, we've got it now, so there we go, it is already used. Yeah. It's already used for understanding epidemiology of diseases, for justifying particular choices that are made in clinical trial designs, for putting clinical trial results into context, historical or external control groups, pre- and post-authorization. But it's clear from listening today that there's both the scope to do more, there's different areas where we can use real-world evidence, and some quantitative approaches which are not yet integrated into our systems. We've spent a couple of years, and I can't immediately see Francesca, but I think she's here somewhere. Hi. With an Adaptive Pathways pilot project, talking to companies about different ways to develop drugs and trying to build in real-world evidence as part of the evidence generation. A lot of the ideas look good in principle. When you get down to talking about the mechanics, can you find the data? Are those the data you actually want? Are those high quality data? Can you put a trial design within that healthcare database? How will you ensure that you don't have important bias in the estimates? When you actually get down to the mechanics and the operations, this gets difficult, and we shouldn't pretend otherwise. And I really like the piece of work or the pieces of work that describe both the operational and the methodological complexities that are inherent in using this type of evidence. We should not reach a situation where we say just because I cannot test an assumption, it doesn't mean it's important. I think I had too many negatives there. Just because I can't test an assumption, I can just dismiss it. We can't say that, yeah? Still too many negatives, but I think you understand. I like the look of the softwares. The Prac Magic looks highly educational. The Addis reminds me of an aeroplane. I'll sit in an aeroplane. I don't know how it works, but somebody else does. I can't fly it, but somebody else can, and I'll sit there. So that's okay. Do I want a proper mechanic and a proper pilot when I'm using Addis? I think I probably do. How many people have read bad observational research in the literature? How many academics get rewarded, get funded by publishing whichever paper looks like it has a nice result? If this is misused as a tool to generate bad research, then we have a problem. However, and I was saying to the colleague who was doing the demonstration, some big flashing red warning lights. Network meta-analyses are complicated. They have very strong assumptions. Please put some red flashing warning lights so that if someone who doesn't know about network meta-analysis tries to do this, they're at least flagged. Before you interpret this, you have to think very carefully about the consistency between the evidence sources, etc., etc. If you're bringing in the real-world data, that makes it even more complicated. We shouldn't hide from the complications. We should embrace them. We should take them on. Last couple of points, and I know I'm going on for a bit too long. So there's a responsibility, I think, on the Get Real teams to identify assumptions, to identify uncertainties, to identify risks, but also to present solutions and possible ways to address those, appreciating that not all assumptions are testable. Where can this fit into our work? Well, we are concerned, and one of the things I really like about the way the conversation's changed since Bern is the language. I think it started off more as, aren't clinical trials useless, which was difficult for me to hear, and is now more in terms of a continuum of evidence generation where you build on clinical trials in a way that meets the needs of all of the stakeholders. And I think, you know, we are concerned in our decisions about external validity. Well, you've given us some quantitative tools where we can better describe that uncertainty. And if that helps us put some better context around the way we describe the regulatory assessment, if we can use a model to say, well, actually, in the light of that problem with external validity, here's how we think the efficacy might play out in a real-world population, and actually we should think about the design, along with the HTAs, of a post-authorization study to look into that, then we've done a better job as a regulatory system. We're passing a better product on to the next stakeholder in the chain. Last point. This feels like an iceberg. So this is a tip of a very impressive iceberg. The bit that's underwater is the dissemination part. And if I think about the regulators, you've got two in the room. You've got Francesca from EMA and you've got myself. Sarah. Well, Sarah's on the HTA side, and maybe there's another HTA person in the room as well. I think the regulatory system in Europe numbers almost 9,000 people. Okay? When I sit at scientific advice and we get 40, 50 new procedures each month, there is, without fail, 5 companies I've never heard of before. The number of drug developers runs into thousands. Most of them will do that bad research because they won't be competent to do the good research. Hence why I want the warning lights, yeah? And it's the same for the scientific advice at the moment. We can have a very good conversation when we get a well-prepared company with some good research proposals, we get well-prepared regulators and HTA bodies, we can have a good conversation. If we have a bad company, if we have a policy person rather than a scientist from the HTA side, if we get the wrong people in the room, you don't have a good conversation. So there's competence and capacity issues on all sides of this discussion. And the last advert, talk. The dialogue will take time. The dialogue might even cost money to come through formal regulatory procedures, but it is the only way to build this into the day job. And please, for the leadership team, think about the different types of regulatory interaction, including the qualification procedures, where you get a regulatory rubber stamp for a particular tool or approach being fit for purpose. I think that could be a really positive way of disseminating some of this. We've had positive approaches, positive experiences before on the methodological approaches that have really transformed the way a company thinks about a particular phase of development, and I can go on to that in the Q&A. Sorry for going on so long.
No, that's fine. You never make small points, Rob. That's it's quite all right. So, I mean, 2 years ago, you pointed out that a lot of the people were visionaries, but yet sort of more ideologues about clinical trials are dead, real world evidence is the way forward. On the other side of the coin, a lot of the folks on the regulatory side were RWE has no value. We don't want to do this. Clinical trials are the gold standard. Do you see a sort of meeting now at the midpoint between the two groups? Is there starting to be a little less reticence on the regulatory side towards accepting, given the reality of some of these checkpoint drugs where we have very complex pathways that do require some sort of evaluation post-market in order to be able to determine reimbursement, pathway analysis, et cetera?
Well, I think we have a general problem on the regulatory side, and perhaps it extends into the other public stakeholder bodies and perhaps even into industry, about the number of well-educated data scientists that we have. And I use that as a general term to cover statisticians, pharmacometricians, pharmacoepi, et cetera, et cetera. Sorry if I've missed your particular discipline. But I don't think we have enough. And I can understand why the oncologist I talk to understands something about RCTs. They understand that multiple testing is bad and that subgroups can be difficult. And they've got that clinical trial methodology 101, yeah? And then I say to them, well, actually, and there's some new things we're talking about, yeah? And then I mentioned before when we were in London, I started to tell you a little bit about the concept of the S-demand. You need to go and read about this, guys, especially if you want to put the clinical trial evidence with the real world evidence. If they are answering fundamentally different questions about the efficacy or effectiveness, why on earth should you put them together, and why should you expect consistent estimates of effect if you do put them together? And I can understand why these people are nervous and reticent of going into different data sources and different methodological approaches. But okay, people who do understand at least a little bit are here, and we have some responsibility then on putting this message through the regulatory system. As I say, we use real-world evidence now. We shouldn't pretend that it's completely new, but there are ways I think we can enhance, both in terms of the scope and in terms of the methodology. It will take some time, but it will happen.
And Rick, getting back to academia, how do you see these things being applied with the work you're doing privately with companies? Do you see this being more and more put into early stage development? Do you see this actually being utilized?
Well, it's hard, and it's hard for all the reasons that Rob just referred to. There's lots of confusion, and in times of confusion, many people would try to stay on the safe side, which is conventional, little room for it. Talking, educating, giving examples, creating room for debate and interaction is what is needed. But it's not going to be easy. And there's a lack of competence and adequately trained people. That's certainly true.
How do we fix that?
By getting people enthusiastic and train them. So we are embarking now on training schemes that should provide for a new generation of data scientists, whatever you call them, but people that are able to make sense in a valid and credible manner of different types and sources of data.
With all the cuts, Elaine, that have been going on in the industry, do you see that as well internally, that just the lack of skill sets internally is a barrier to putting this stuff in play?
No, I think this is actually an area the companies are investing in at the moment. I think because everybody has recognised that this is, if we invest in this and really use real world evidence to its full extent, and we improve and we do good evidence generation, high quality evidence generation, then it has got the potential to really change the paradigm and sort a lot of the challenges that we've all had. So I think actually from an investment perspective, it's a good area. I think when you say with respect to skills, no, I think again, the companies have highly skilled individuals. We have individuals that are specialised in dealing with real-world data sets. We have individuals now that are experts in collecting prospectively real-world data, and we have analysts and modelers that are doing great stuff with all the data. I think really for us, it's how that is being applied and how it's almost it's educating the traditional asset leaders who have been, I say, developing assets in a very standard way, using perhaps epidemiology to answer very simple questions around targets, around patient populations, very traditional epidemiology type questions, to really driving the shift to get them to take a risk in some ways. As Rick said, sometimes we don't have all the answers, so an approach, it could be really hard. They've got a question, but encouraging people to actually take the risk, try a new approach, try a different way, bring some of the RCT world and the kind of observational world together and do something different is hard, and especially when you can't guarantee the success, and to get investment for that is also challenging. So I think that's more the challenge for us is how we get it really embedded into the heart and really change the culture around how we traditionally deliver medicines. And as you say, it's not new. We've used it in research and development for a number of years, but there are different ways of using it. And I think the concept of Get Real, which has been fantastic, is really thinking about what you can do in the pre-launch phase to really drive that evidence generation much earlier in the process.
And Antonio, when we're talking about cultural shift and changes in mentality, how are you seeing this develop in your patient groups themselves? Are they more accepting towards this? How do you think we should move this going forward? If there was a Get Real 2, what answers would you like covered for your stakeholder groups? What do you think needs to happen?
Well, first of all, I think that generating tangible impact is, in my belief, as important as it is communicating well what impact has been generated. So in this respect, I think that information should be looked at as a priority when dealing with patient communities, because as I said earlier, there is a stronger degree of willingness to be better aware of these processes. But one of the other issues that I think it's important to address in the future is the usability. Of the outputs that have been produced throughout Get Real. I think it's going to strongly benefit acceptability by patients if it is clearly shown how these outputs can be used to arrive at higher quality decisions that would not be reached if those tools were not used. So it's important to highlight the added value of these of the tools that we have been developing together. And also it will be increasingly important, in my opinion, to continue to explore acceptability, the criteria upon which different stakeholders rely to say, okay, this is acceptable or this is not acceptable. So continue to explore stakeholder perspectives, but at the same time favoring, I think it's important, an increasing shift from just collecting and analyzing perspectives to favoring stakeholder engagement, not only patient engagement, but stakeholder engagement. Also, it will be important to show when and under what conditions it can be more appropriate to involve one stakeholder rather than another. So collecting views and perspectives, it's important, but it's also important to facilitate engagement, and why not also to explore how regulatory frameworks can be changed, how institutional arrangements can be changed, what organizational forms can be pursued to favor engagement in a stable way over time of stakeholders and, of course, from my side, of patients in the drug development process.
Thank you. We've got about a half hour. I'd like to open the floor for any questions. Like I've said earlier, you've all been upstairs playing with the toys. You've seen the outputs. You've seen the tools and methodologies. Does anybody have any questions here in the audience? Please, don't be shy. We're all friends. No? Falling asleep? Looking forward to going out in the protest. Yes, Francesca.
Yes, if there was any gap in the methodologies that has been identified and that you think should be further explored or developed.
What needs to happen next?
Well, methodologies, it's maybe a bit of a difficult word because I think that much of the theory is well understood. But bridging the gaps between what we think makes sense theoretically and can be done in practice is something else. So just to give one example, I think there's lots to be done before we can indeed have our studies carried out under the hood, if you wish, of our healthcare systems. And obviously there's a great attraction of doing TWICs or studies within registries, still from the perspective of randomizing, which I believe we are going to find very difficult to get rid of, and for good reasons. But bringing the paradigm of randomization into like a living and learning healthcare system, where we can, on a continuous basis, generate knowledge from the things we do on a day-to-day basis. I think those are prospects that are very exciting, but require good thinking on how to implement that.
Rob, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't yet read all of the publications in detail, and if I should have, I apologise for that, but I didn't have access to all of them. But I don't think the groups working on the methodology would claim everything's been solved. And to some extent, even the primary mission statement has a forward-looking, we still need to work out what best practice looks like. And I take the methodology into that, both in terms of the data sources and the quality of the data sources. And I read at least one of the research deliverables that said, well, we were trying to work with this data source, but it just wasn't good enough. So we can't test whether it works or not in this one. Sorry, guys, but that's the truth. And that's good. That's where we are. And not just in terms of the data sources, but in terms of the trial designs, there are limitations to the coming back to the assumptions you make, etc. Combining the different data sources and the methodological approaches, the propensity scores, or whatever it might be that you use to put A with B. I said something in London along the lines of, is there more work that you can do on some of these untestable assumptions? Was it a good idea to put A with B, or is study X consistent with observational research Y? Is not a testable assumption. You can't look into the data and prove that to be a good idea. But is there more work that can be done, perhaps using simulation work, to say, well, yes, on average, if we use this technique, we will give you estimates without important bias. That's maybe something to think on going forwards. So in more direct answer, I don't think the ambition for this type of project can be to sort out all of the methodological issues. I think that will continue. Academics outside Get Real will continue to contribute to the literature, but maybe it is part of the sustainability to pick up those good ideas when they come along and build them into the whole Get Real package. Because to me, I don't want a black box. I don't want a company to come, here's my network meta-analysis in Addis. It might be great, or it might be terrible. And it's not the fault of the software that makes it great or terrible. So I still need to understand what's going on behind the scenes, all the details of the methodology, and to the extent that can be improved by further research and by perhaps other types of research like simulation work that can try and convince me there's only minimal bias to a particular methodological approach, then that should continue.
So you don't want the box to be like, the miracle happens here?
For aeroplanes, I'm fine with it because there's another regulator. For medicines development, I kind of have to understand it.
Aerodynamics is a sound principle, so
Just add a few words because I couldn't agree more, and I think that what I hope that Get Real in the future will be is, on the one hand, an advocacy group for the thinking, but at the same time a place for continued innovation. So where you can either projects or collaborations across various parties, where you can take on some of these issues, and they may turn out to be insolvable at the end, but at least spend some energy on trying to understand, even when they are not to be solved, why they are not being solved. So a community, a platform for continued innovation, but also dissemination of knowledge and interaction with society.
Well, the bar is moving because
Yeah.
I did a podcast in July with Anja Schiel from the Norway HTA and Bettina Rill, who many of us know from obviously a microbiologist and a geneticist who's now a patient advocate. Her husband died of melanoma. I mean, essentially both are saying the same thing. When we're talking about things like Parkinson, when we're talking about things like Duchenne's, I mean, we know what the outcomes are. I mean, we know what happens. Why do we want a control arm? I mean, why not do an outcomes-based trial? And it's hard to, when you have HTAs and educated people saying, well, we know what the outcome is, you're going to die. I mean, how can you?
Yeah, but you can die even more miserable if you don't.
That's true.
So, there's always another side to it, anything that doesn't work can still harm, but it's a bit of a different discussion, obviously, and we've seen that now, but we saw it also at the start of the HIV epidemic, who wanted to be in a trial? Yeah, multiple trials sequentially, but there's an ethical, apart from methodological issue to that, which needs to be addressed.
It also needs to be addressed.
I won't slow down the conversation, but I fundamentally disagree that we can predict outcomes even in something like Duchenne's. 15-year outcomes, 20-year outcomes, fine. 2, 3, 4, it's not, even in a disease as debilitating and as serious as that, there's heterogeneity in the patient population.
Of course.
And if you pick one population for the trial, you'll get a different result than if you pick another population. I'm sorry, I like randomization, even in real-world evidence sources.
Me too.
Another question. I saw a hand come up. Yes. If you could say your name and where you're from, please, as well.
My name is Katong Xiao from Frankfurt, Germany. And I want to address the fact that I like the fact that discussion go into the challenges in coming up with well-educated, all-rounded data science to do real-world evidence, which is dealing with very complex situation. And we really need people who are able to holistically understand the complexity of the real-world evidence. And if you just look at the advertisement coming up from the pharma industry when they look for data science, you immediately can understand how they divide the data science into multiple roles. The guy who take care of big data, the guy who do the translation research, the guy that focus on the effectiveness, health economics, and so on. Ideally, we need somebody who really trying to link all these things together. Furthermore, there's only very few pharma company actually link clinical trial to digital health devices, and then link that into clinical trial design, incorporating real-world information. There are very few pharma actually doing that. And I think this is very important to recognize that I think many years ago when we talk about bioinformatics, somebody do a database, they say we are bioinformatics. Somebody do some software, they say bioinformatics. I think for data science, for real-world evidence, we are facing this situation. We can't tell the difference of oranges, apple for data science in order to address the complex situation.
Yeah, how are you going to address this? How are you addressing this at GSK?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I from my personal experience, is more around the prospective studies. Some randomised, some not. But you're absolutely right. We've actually found that on our study teams now, where we would traditionally perhaps have one clinical statistician, we have a clinical statistician, we have an observational data analyst, we have a modeler. We have all sorts of, basically all the disciplines you just mentioned we have in a single study team, and everybody keeps saying, why have you got so many people on these teams? And it's because you need that diversity of thinking to navigate your way around all the challenges that you face when, especially if you've got digital devices, you've got perhaps some EHR data, you've got some ECRF data, you've got all the different types of data sources. There's no one person can get their heads around all of that. So certainly that's how we're tackling it from a prospective study design. I think in general terms we have, you're right, we still have our separate groups, But what we see is much closer collaboration between all the groups now. So we do bring, so under our real world evidence umbrella, we do have the epidemiologists, the observational data analysts, but they also work with our value evidence and outcomes analysts as well, and the clinical statisticians. So there's more and more collaboration across the groups. But we haven't come to the stage where we can merge it all together yet. I think that'll be a long way off.
So just to challenge a little bit, because I think in that case you're in a good position, and many companies will be envious, even the companies who do employ all those people, never mind the companies who don't employ all those people. But when we have the scientific advice interactions, they seem so highly structured and well prepared from the company's side. So well rehearsed. This is what we'll talk about. We'll only talk about this. If we get asked this question, you'll answer. If we get asked this question, I talked a little bit about needing to change the culture on the regulatory side to embrace some more of this. But do you think even the large companies who do have all of these skills in-house might need to change the culture as well in terms of the interactions? I think an informal conversation about some of this will work a lot better than the regular, highly structured, highly formal scientific advice type conversations.
No, and I can't agree more. And that's what we're trying to encourage the teams to do. I mean, we're a relatively new group within GSK, but all the new study designs that we're working on now, that's exactly, we're encouraging them to go and get that early advice and have those early informal discussions, because they're not just because of the designs, but again because of some of the operational challenges that we've heard about today. Some of the approaches we want to take, even just from practical terms, need to be discussed, and the impact of that needs to be discussed on, as we heard, on the impact of the data.
Question? Yes. In the back corner there?
Yeah, hi. This is Gert. I work on ADIS. Rob has mentioned it several times now, so...
The black box.
Thanks for the free publicity. But I would like to respond to his first remark about sort of unexperienced users or uneducated users being able to use it. I couldn't agree more. And that's actually an area that I'm interested in how would we maintain sort of the public nature of ADIS while also sort of ensuring that people get good information. So I have lots of ideas about that, building in peer review perhaps, or something along those lines, but we didn't really have the mandate to work on that within Get Real. We've been really very focused on methods and using those. And I think having this more automated system actually gives you a little bit more assurance that at least some classes of mistakes can't happen now. You can't make a coding mistake in your Winbox code because you're not doing Winbox code. So I think at this stage actually ADIS would be more appropriate as an in-house tool rather than the completely public thing that it is now. And that's something that we'd like to work on. Then to the second remark about it being a black box, I actually kind of take offense to that because that's something that we're trying to fight with ADIS. So we're trying to capture the whole process from extracted data to the results of your analysis, and maybe tying in additional analysis on top of your original analysis, and basically being able to trace back from the final result all the way to the extracted data. I think with regards to methodological transparency, I think we've also come a long way there. Because first of all, you can see exactly what choices people have made to arrive at a certain model. And the analysis code is actually an open source R package that if you want, you can audit. And we want to make that easier, and we want to actually, when you run an analysis, we want you to actually be able to download some R code that would allow you to reproduce that locally, but we're not entirely there yet.
No, I think those are really good points, and I accept entirely the correction about the black box. I guess the context from my side is it's kind of a black box until we've looked into it, and I accept that we can look into it, and that's good. And this is where the leadership might think about using a qualification procedure to say, actually, the methodology that's used within ADIS is fit for purpose for this type of network meta-analysis, for example. And on the first point, the red flashing warning lights, or even a protocol that sits alongside the software that says, you know, if you're doing the network meta-analysis, you need to think about this, this, and this. And when you report the network meta-analysis, you need to address the fact that you've made this assumption and that assumption. So even something that sits alongside it to give some guidance to how the research should be structured and reported could well be useful.
Yes.
Hi, thank you everyone for your talks. My name is Amr Makedi. I work at the Dutch HTA agency and I was part of GetReal. I have a couple of questions. What we did with GetReal sort of take a first look at the component of effectiveness and how we could use real-world data for it, or observational data. I have a different question though. Is through the case studies, we've tried to look at the incremental added value of real-world evidence. And my point is, we have seen that it could have some roles in very specific contexts. Now, what's the step beyond this if we want to think of a GetReal 2 or a different direction? Because I agree with what's been said by the panel. There's going to be a lot of methodological development in a different tangent, and we're not there yet, but it's going on outside of the scope of GetReal. But how about using real-world evidence to inform other kinds of parameters? So we've talked about effectiveness, and I hope I don't say the C word right now, but cost effectiveness, utilities, et cetera, et cetera. And there are a lot of, from an HTA perspective, there's a big need for observational data for a lot of different types of questions. That's something we haven't discussed. Should we discuss in the future? That's one question. And the second question is, how does that fit as well as we move as an HTA body, but also as different stakeholders, to the idea of totality of evidence across years and years of post-marketing years?
Son of GetReal. Next steps. What do you see as the next steps to address these issues, these follow-on issues, cost effectiveness, et cetera? Who wants to take a chunk at that? I see a lot of people passing the buck here. I don't see anybody jumping.
There was a lot in that question, Amber. I'll pick off the bits that I think I remember, and then those others can support my aging brain that can't cope with so many of these. I think so you made a point about the requirements for the use of observational research as well as the pragmatic trial approach, and I think you're absolutely correct. I think the way we are certainly approaching it within industry is that you need to be able to arm yourself with all the right tools to be able to deliver the evidence you need for your particular asset. So I don't think we'll ever get to a stage where there's a recipe for how to deliver the evidence. It has to be, as you say, identifying the need, the evidence need, the gap, and then designing the right study to address that gap. So I don't think there's never going to be one single piece of evidence. It's like always going to be a mix of studies, and I think you heard earlier on, even with Salford, there's the Salford study is the main study, but there's also additional retrospective observational studies ongoing around that to help understand and interpret that data. So I don't think it ever is standalone. It isn't something that we've spent a huge amount of time on in GetReal at the moment, but I think certainly moving forward, there is a lot to be done around increasing the quality of the observational research that's out there. And I think if we can maintain the momentum we have with GetReal, I think these are definitely some of the discussions that it would be great to use this platform that we've created to have these debates. What does quality look like? What does data quality mean for an observational data source? What are those parameters? What are those standards? Can we come to some kind of agreement? So I think there is a lot of work that we can be doing in that space as well.
Rick?
I don't know if that answered all your questions.
Yeah, and
You danced around it well, Elaine.
the missing part was on costs. That
Oh,
should
yeah,
also
as I
come into the equation.
Yeah.
So, well, obviously, one of the reasons why this has become such a big debate is because of cost considerations. If there were endless resources, then the whole discussion would have looked differently. So it cannot be ignored that costs are important and that somehow the benefits and the cost needs to be weighed. Now, the point of course is that costs are fluid. What is affordable across us varies, across countries varies even more, across the world varies dramatically. So therefore, it's not an absolute sort of variable in the equation, whereas, for example, safety may be. So there's different types of variables that we're looking at, but I think that costs are certainly to be part of the discussion, also to set priorities in the things that we do.
Final question. Yes, down here. Again, please state your name and where you're from.
Denise Mourir from Janssen. Thank you for the discussion. I just wanted to bring back to the decision-making aspect. So Get Real, we have all these tools, we can address the challenges with the different options that are being proposed. But from a usability perspective, what can you say in terms of the stakeholders, so regulatory and HTAs, actually leveraging these tools from real-world evidence, and how can we say going forward that actually the work did make a change compared to where we started? So the current way of working is actually really building on all the efforts from the last 3 years and getting somewhere with real-world evidence, adding value for the reviewer, for the access to medicine for patients.
Thank you. So how do we define success? How do we get it in the hands of the right people? Rob, why don't we start with you?
I can start, and I'll make some positive noises about how I think this can be used, and the group should take that as a major compliment to all of the work that's been done, and my congratulations for all the work that's been done. At the moment, when we license a medicine, all of the licensing decisions are made with some uncertainty. There's always a risk management plan to follow up on safety. There's always uncertainties around efficacy, whether they come from the external validity of the trials or the use of an intermediate endpoint or whatever it might be, drug-drug interactions, whatever it might be. And sometimes those uncertainties are of sufficient magnitude that we want to put some post-authorization work in place, and that's not necessarily a randomized controlled trial. So we'll commission companies to go off and set up a product registry or do some observational research or whatever it might be. If these tools and these methodologies mean that our requests for post-authorization work are improved, then we win. Now, similarly, sometimes we want to make early licensing decisions without having a comprehensive clinical evidence base, so we've got the conditional marketing authorization tool. There's always work to be done post-authorization. How do you complete the clinical evidence base? RCTs, especially against placebo, once you've got a drug that's sufficiently impressive to warrant an early marketing authorization, can be challenging to conduct. Maybe this gives us some other tools, other ways of conducting those studies. And as I say, people think of regulatory decision-making as yes, no, is it approved or is it not? Much more important is how do you approve something in terms of the label you give and in terms of the post-authorization work that you give. And if some of the tools help us better identify the uncertainties that we have at the time of the opinion, therefore create a better label and create better post-authorization work, then we win. And I at least see the potential in the tools to be able to do that, and that's the conversation that we need to take back to the regulatory system in Europe now.
That's great. Thank you, Rob. Thank you for your attention. We're going to cut the panel off a little short now. So we're going to have a 15-minute break. Please go upstairs, play with the toys, have a coffee, and we'll see you back here at 3:10. Thank you very much, and thank you, panel.
Thank you.